A biography records what a man did. A mythology reveals what he became. Seth Czerepak.
I will remember that day for the rest of my life. I was 13, standing on the shore of Lake Silver, though there was nothing bright about what lived in it. The lake sat on the edge of Winter Haven, Florida, where I grew up, and all morning the sun had hammered the shallows until the water gave that heat back to me, pressing warm against my shins, curling around my ankles like something that had been waiting a long time for a boy to wade in. The sand sucked softly at the soles of my feet, fine and yielding, the floor of the lake breathing beneath every step, and I walked out into it the way a boy walks toward a dare he has not yet confessed to himself. I had heard the stories. Men who fished the lake passed them around like a sacred oral tradition that had been dipped in moonshine and wiped dry with an old dish towel. The stories said that the lake had no bottom. It had taken grown men whole and never surrendered the bodies, but had closed over them without a ripple, the way a grave closes over a coffin. And down where the sunlight gave out there was another realm, a drowned and lightless world, patient and soulless and older than the one I was standing in. I had built that realm in my mind 100 times. I could feel it beneath me as I walked, vast and cold and aware of my intrusion, a drowned world lying underneath the bright one, waiting. The warmth thinned the further I went. The water climbed to my chest, and the heat the sun had loaned it let go by degrees, until what touched my skin was no longer the sun's water, but the lake's cold and ancient throat. And then I saw it ahead of me, a dark patch on the surface, a stain where the green water turned to black, the seam where the warm world ended and the drowned one began. Something pulled tight in my chest. Fear, yes. But underneath the fear was something quieter and far older, and it was not warning me back. It was calling me forward, out toward the black water, the way the deep has always called me. So I stepped off the edge of the world I knew, and the bottom was gone. My feet kicked violently against the emptiness beneath them, clawing for the sand that had held me my whole life, and there was nothing there, only the cold and the black seeming to descend forever. Raw panic seized in my chest, a fist closing around my lungs, because I did not know how far it fell, or whether it fell at all, or whether it simply kept opening beneath me like the throat of an ancient predator. And then I did the thing I still cannot fully explain to you. I did not turn and thrash back toward the warm and the safe. I filled my lungs and I drove myself down into it, down into the cold, reaching for a floor because I had to know if one even existed. The water turned to ice against my skin. The pressure laid its hands over my ears and pressed, and the breath in my chest burned down to its last ember, and still no bottom, still nothing, only the dark pulling me deeper toward the drowned world. Until the burning in my chest won, and I turned and I tore upward toward the trembling light, and I broke the surface with the sound I had never heard come out of me before. And in that instant, treading over the void with the warm shore impossibly far behind me, and nothing solid anywhere beneath me, the panic broke apart, and something I can only call peace came down over me in its place. Because out there, hung over a darkness with no floor in it, I finally understood the thing the lake had pulled me out to learn. There was no bottom to find. There was no ledge to stand on, no net strung beneath me, no limit waiting to catch my fall. There was exactly one thing left in the world that I was allowed to do: swim. I had no choice now but to swim. And the moment I surrendered to that, the moment I stopped spending my last strength reaching for a bottom that was never coming, the terror let go of my chest, and something rose up from underneath to carry me. I did not have a name for it then, but I had felt it, and I would feel it again at the bottom of every collapse I ever suffered. Present, watching, waiting for me to stop fighting long enough to find the true source of my strength. Hold that boy in the water in your mind. We are going to come back for him at the end. Now let me talk to you. Wherever you are sitting, or lying down right now. Maybe it is late and the house has gone quiet and everyone in it is asleep, and you are awake anyway, staring at a ceiling you cannot see, running the same loop you ran last night and the night before. Maybe from the outside your life looks like a life the younger you would have done anything to have. The income, the title, the family in the photograph, and maybe none of it reaches the thing sitting in your chest, that low hum that says something is wrong, that you are running out of time, that this was not supposed to be it. A mind that is not at peace is an inescapable prison of distraction and worry and fear, and no amount of money or title or applause has ever once unlocked that cell. Maybe you have built an entire life and you move through it like a stranger who broke in through a window. Maybe you are gripping something right now, a relationship, a company, or a version of yourself, gripping it so hard your knuckles have gone white and your hands have gone numb because you are terrified of what happens to you if you let go. I know that floor. I have been face down on it more than once, and I learned something down there that took me 33 years and 4 trips to the bottom to understand, something I am not going to be able to just hand you because I could not have received it that way either. I had to be taken all the way down to the place where I could not argue with the lesson in front of me. So that is where I am going to take you, not to the mountaintop, to the bottom. Because the floor you are lying on tonight is not your punishment. It may turn out to be the most sacred place you will ever stand, not because of this video and not because of me or even you, but because of something else that stands there with you. I discovered this long before I found a name for it. I was in the 4th grade. We were supposed to be talking about current events, and I had an idea I could not wait to share, and I kept reaching for it, and the room kept moving past me, the way a room does to a boy it has quietly decided not to hear. And I turned my head to the wall, stung, and there was a poster there, a man sitting alone on the side of a mountain, looking out over a sunset, and a line about how some men hear a different drummer than the people marching around them. Henry David Thoreau wrote the real version of that line more than a century before anyone printed it on a poster. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, it is because he hears a different drummer. There was a song I loved that carried the same message, that the magic was never in the song, it was always in the singer. And sitting there in that circle, unheard, something quiet moved through me, almost like comfort, a knowing I had no words for at 9 years old. What if the thing that made me feel out of step was not the thing that was wrong with me? What if it was the thing that was right? A couple of weeks later, that same teacher, in that same room, stepped out for 20 minutes and left one of the favored kids in charge to write down the name of anyone who acted up. And while she was gone, a boy near the window started scratching at his arm. The kid beside him saw it and jerked away like he had been burned, said it was catching, said it was spreading, and I watched it move across the room. The next child started scratching, and the next, and the one after that, each one catching it from the last, not because anything was on their skin, but because the belief had jumped from body to body, and the body does not argue with what the mind has already accepted. Red welts rose up on their skin. Their arms went blotchy and raw where their own nails dug at them. Their bodies were manufacturing the proof of a thing that did not exist because they believed it, and the believing was enough to make it real in their flesh. Within minutes, the whole class had it. Kids climbed on top of their desks for safety. Kids shrieking, clawing at themselves, scrambling away from anyone who came near, because the instant you were touched, you had it too. Everyone except me. I was the only one who did not catch it. They came at me on purpose, grabbed my arms, pressed their welts against my skin, trying to give it to me, and nothing happened because I did not believe it, and so there was nothing to take hold. As I stood in the middle of that screaming, scratching room, standing perfectly still, and something in me understood a thing I have never once let go of since. A lie does not become true because the whole room is bleeding for it. The truth does not need a single other soul to agree with it. A crowd can summon a sickness out of thin air and wear it on their skin and still be wrong, and the one person left standing outside the spell will always look insane to the people inside it. I did not have language yet for what kept me out of it, but it was the same presence that had risen up to carry me out of the lake, though I would not understand that for years. It is the signal underneath all the noise, the part of you that does not argue and does not panic and does not catch what the crowd is spreading, because it is answering to something that the crowd cannot see. That afternoon was the answer to the boy staring at that poster.
It is not the crowd who has the final say on what is true. It is the one who refuses to follow them. It is not the song that matters. It is the person singing it. It is not what you do in life that matters. It is who you become. I was born in 1976 in Tallahassee, Florida. By the time I was a teenager, my parents had divorced, and I had decided the entire world was a lie I wanted no part of. I dropped out of high school at 16. I played in rock bands. I trained in martial arts. I read everything I could get my hands on about philosophy and the occult, and not the gentle kind. I went looking in the dark on purpose, the same way I had waded out toward the black water at 13. There was a police car that used to park outside my house in the afternoons and just watch me. That was the kind of kid I had become. I was at war with everything, and most of all with myself. And one night, 17 years old, after too much to drink and a bad fight with my friends, I took my father's rifle and I tried to end my life. The gun was loaded. The safety was on. I did not know that until after I had already pulled the trigger. And in the half-second after that click, something happened in me that I did not expect and could not have predicted. Regret. Not regret that it had failed, but regret that I had tried it all. And right behind the regret came something worse, something I have never been able to shake from that night. I was suddenly completely terrified of who I was alone in that room with, because it was me. I had just discovered there was another self inside me, one that could do a thing like that with my own hands, and I did not know him, so I could not trust him, and I could not get away from him. There is no fear on earth like the fear of a man who cannot trust himself. It was not a death wish that took hold of me that night. It was shame, the rawest kind, the shame of a boy who looked inside and could not bear what he found. And here is the lie that shame tells, the lie I believed that night and would spend decades unlearning. It told me I was broken, but I was not born broken. No one is. We are born whole and then made broken, one survival at a time, until we mistake the scar tissue for our own face. But underneath even that, something in me did not want to die. Something in me wanted to live, and I had very nearly silenced it forever before I ever heard a word it had to say. That was my first floor, and listen to what rose up to meet me on it. Not long after that night, somebody handed me a book by a man named Les Brown, and there were two things in it that leapt off the page and grabbed me by the throat. The first was one line. It said that what you do in life is not nearly as important as who you become. And I am telling you, it poured over me like warm honey, the way the sun had poured into that shallow water. Because my whole life I had been taught that I was the sum of my wins with my failures subtracted out, and by that arithmetic I was already bankrupt at 17. But this said something else entirely. This said that as long as I kept growing into something, I was going to be okay. No matter how many times I failed, no matter how far down I went. The man I was becoming was the point, not the wreckage I happened to be standing in. The second thing was a story Les Brown told on himself. He was a boy carrying a bag of groceries home, and some bigger kids set on him, and because his mother had drilled into him never to waste food, he took the beating with both arms wrapped around that bag, protecting the groceries instead of defending himself. Until his mother came out onto the porch and yelled at him to drop the groceries and fight. And he did. The lesson he pulled out of it never left me. There are times you have to set down what you are carrying, the daily worries, the responsibilities, and the safe and sensible load in your arms, because you cannot fight for your life with your hands full.
Most people never fight for their dream because their arms are too full with the duties of everyday life. I did not understand yet how many times I would have to drop the bag. That was the vow. 17 years old on the far side of a trigger that should have ended me. I am going to become someone. That is the first time in my life I chose to swim instead of sink, and every floor that came after it was just a deeper, colder version of Lake Silver. But the dark water was not finished with me, because right around that same age, 17, I began having experiences I still do not have clean language for. I was lying in my bed one night, wide awake, not dreaming, and I heard a voice, close, right at my ear, and it offered me the one thing I wanted more than anything else in the world at that age, to become a great musician, a known one, and all I had to do in exchange was give myself over to it, in a name that was not God's. It scared me down to the floor of my soul. And remember, I was an atheist at the time. I did not even believe in the God I called on, but what came out of my mouth was, "Go away in the name of God." And it went. For a while, and then it came back, the same time every week, like clockwork, for years. Awake, asleep, sitting in a room full of friends, it did not matter. For almost 10 years I lived alongside that thing, until it very nearly broke my mind, until I was finally forced to admit there was a spiritual world whether I had given it permission to exist or not. I had gone wading into the black water looking for the bottom, and the black water had looked back up at me. I need you to notice something here because it is the whole game. The presence who rose up to carry me at Lake Silver and this thing that hunted me in the dark at night are not the same. One calls you down into the deep so it can teach you to swim. The other calls you down into the deep so it can drown you and wear your skin. Learning to tell those two voices apart is most of the spiritual life. It took me a decade and it nearly cost me everything. I was 26 when the floor finally gave out completely, and this time what came up through it was not a voice in the dark. This time it was light. I had just finished college. I was anti-church, anti-religion, still mostly certain the whole thing was a story that frightened people told themselves to sleep at night. And one day, in the middle of one of those waking episodes, I watched a light come in through the window. It moved like liquid metal, the way mercury rolls and gathers, and it pulled itself together into the shape of a child. And the child crossed the room to me, and he put his hand on me, and two things happened in the very same instant, two things that should not be able to occupy the same moment. The first was that he knew me, all the way down, every memory, every intention, every filthy and cowardly and disgusting thing I had ever done or wanted or hidden, every part of myself I had buried so deep I had forgotten I had buried it. He knew all of it, down to the cell. And the second thing was that he loved me, not in spite of what he knew, but alongside it. Total exposure and total grace in the same breath, and it nearly tore my soul down the middle because I had nowhere to put it. I did not know it was possible to be that completely known and still be that completely loved. I asked him, "Are you the Messiah?" I do not know to this day why those were the words that came, and he answered me. He said, "If you are as a small child, then I am who you say I am." And then it was as if my soul was pulled clean out of my body, and I was standing outside, and the sky had gone black as deep midnight, and people were walking past me, going about their ordinary lives as though nothing was happening, and it struck me as deeply, violently wrong that they could not see it. It was the first time I saw the world the way I would come to see it for the rest of my life, a drowned world, a whole civilization living its days underwater and calling it air. And a voice inside me said, "Look behind you." And I turned, and I saw the cross rising up into that black sky, and he was on it, and there was so much blood pouring down off of it and onto the ground beneath. And I walked to it, and I knelt down underneath it, and the whole time I was thinking, this cannot be real, I do not want this to be real. And I could taste the iron of his blood as it ran down over my face and my mouth. And I came apart underneath that cross. For 2 weeks afterward I was not myself. I would be in the middle of teaching a music lesson and have to get up and leave the room because I had burst into tears, and I am not a man who cries easily. For years after that, I tried to argue my way back out of it because becoming a Christian was the single last thing on earth I wanted to be. But a sane person does not argue against his own experience. The prodigal son does not reason his way home. He comes to himself, and then he turns around and starts the long walk back with nothing in his hands, and while he is still a long way off, the father sees him and runs to welcome him. That was my second awakening, and it was the deepest water I had been in yet, and the presence I had felt in the lake finally had a face. In my book, Awaken Your Shadow, I call this the owl awakening, the opening of eyes that finally see in the dark. And I am here to tell you that kind of sight is only ever bought at the bottom. But here is what nobody warns you about becoming awakened. It doesn't always make you a better person. It doesn't always make your life more prosperous or even more spiritual, and it certainly doesn't keep you from hitting another floor. In fact, it makes it inevitable that you will. By 2009, I had clawed my way up in the corporate world. I had become one of the top salesmen in my entire company, crossed 6 figures, almost $110,000 in a year, the first person in my family to ever touch money like that. 7 years before, I had been a broke music teacher trying to fill a studio. Then one day my manager walked up to my desk for a routine check-in, and that day, in the worst recession of my lifetime, when grown men were clinging white-knuckled to any job they could keep, I told him that I was resigning to start my own business. My manager's jaw came open like a trapdoor. Everyone I knew was certain I had lost my mind. My family called it a mistake. The people at my church were already counting the days until I was looking for a job again. 6 months later, I was on Bayshore Boulevard in Tampa, out for a run with my dog, a yellow lab named Rocky, who had found me a few years before. And my bank account stood at negative 34 cents. My blood pressure was high enough to crack the Hoover Dam, and the entire contents of my refrigerator were 1 bottle of water, 1 half-eaten apple, and 3 fish oil capsules. That was it. That was the sum total of everything I had built, sitting in a cold and empty box. During my jog, I stopped along the path that ran alongside the bay, and as I looked out over the water, I felt the pull. The same pull you felt in your chest when life begins to contract. Just go back to your backup plan. Get a job, quit the dream, feed yourself. And I told myself it was fear, the recession, the empty fridge, the rent coming due. But it was not fear. It was guilt. The guilt of every person who had told me not to, lined up in my head waiting to be proven right. And underneath them the deeper guilt of failing the man I had promised myself I would become. As Satan had tempted Jesus, saying, "Turn these stones into bread." It was the same voice that tells you to abandon your calling and pour your time and energy into doing whatever you must do to survive. And then I heard it, the still small voice. The same presence from the lake, the same presence I had met under the cross. And it said to me, "Seth, the decisions that have lifted you to the highest places in your life, you have always made them at your lowest moments.
Do not give up now. I will catch you."
But I did not go back. I refused the bread. I dropped the bag of groceries, the safe job, the sensible retreat, the whole armful of reasons to quit, and I stayed out in the dark water with no bottom under me, and I swam. I landed my first freelance writing job that very same day. Inside of a year, I was back to making 6 figures, but the money was never the point, and it is not the point now. The point is who I became standing on that path above the bay with nothing in the fridge and less than nothing in the bank, choosing to trust the man I was becoming over the voice telling me to crawl back. The point is what I learned down there, that the decision you make at the bottom becomes one of 2 things. It becomes a launch pad or it becomes a cage. The very same vows. Never love again. Never trust again. Never risk everything on your dream again. These vows may put the steel in your spine that gets you up off the floor, but they can also put a lid on the life you were meant to live after. A man can swear an oath at the bottom that saves his life and then spend the next 20 years imprisoned by it, walled off, self-sufficient, untouchable, alone. Who you become is decided down there in the cold, and the most important thing you decide is whether the vow that gets you up will also be the ceiling that keeps you down. I chose the launch pad that morning, barely, by a hair, but I chose it. Then life came for everything I had left. In February of 2023, I was 8 years into a marriage that had suffocated in the coffin of its own denial long before I found the courage to close the lid and throw the first shovel of dirt over it. The night before I left, I told a friend, half joking, I just have to get through these next 10 days alive. I did not yet know what was coming. I have carried a strange prophetic streak my whole life, and it still unsettles me when it lands like that. The next morning, the life I had built with her was over, and I walked out of it with my dog and whatever fit in the car, and for 10 days the two of us had nowhere to live, everything I still owned riding in the trunk behind me. I had spent the last 3 of those married years barely able to walk, crippled by arthritis, certain my life was already finished, and I had clawed my way back onto my own 2 feet through breath and prayer and the slow inner work that nobody saw. So I went into those 10 days already knowing something I had not known before. The body can fail you completely, and the soul inside it can still stand. What had been killing me at the end was never the weight of holding another person up. It was the emptiness of a life with no purpose left in it. On the final night of those 10 days, I ended up checking into a hotel on the wrong side of town. 2 places with almost the same name, one good and one bad, and of course I booked the bad one. The room was filthy enough that I would not put my body on the bed. I threw my bags down onto the bare wooden floor, and I slept on top of my own belongings, in my clothes, in my shoes, like an animal curled over the last of what it owns. I woke in the dark of early morning with my face inches from the boards, close enough to smell them, old smoke and mildew and something sour underneath, and there was a stain in the wood right in front of my eyes that looked like dried blood, and I did not let myself wonder whose. The cold had come up out of that floor in the night and gotten all the way into me, into the joints I had only just learned to walk on again, and I lay there shaking and could not get warm. And there was no thought left in my head but this: worthless. This is what it all came to. Every bit of love, persistence, hope, and compassion I poured into the life that she and I were building. And beneath that crumpled up hope was a question more ancient and more terrifying, and which I had asked myself every time I had given my heart away to someone who would someday be less than a stranger. What is the point in building anything that could collapse so quickly into ruin? I had committed my life to being a good and loyal man. I had kept my word when it had repeatedly cost me everything. I had opened my heart after it had been broken more times than I could count. I had chosen to love when every scar I carried was screaming at me to bolt the door and never open it again, chosen to trust people who had already taught me what it costs to trust the wrong one, and chosen to stay kind in a world that kept hammering the same lesson into me. That kindness is just the place where the next wound gets in. And lying there in the cold with the smell of those boards in my mouth, I asked the question every decent man eventually asks at the very bottom: was it worth it? Was it worth it to be the one who did the right thing, who carried the weight, who kept loving and kept trusting and kept getting back up, when a filthy floor on the wrong side of town was where being that man had finally landed me? And some part of me wanted, more than anything in the world, to close the door for good, to decide the decent man was a fool and that I would never be him again. And that is exactly when I heard it again. The presence, the witness, the same quiet voice from the lake and the cross and the bay, rising up within me saying, "A man lives 2 lives, the life he learns from and the life he lives." Those 10 days were the wall standing between the two. That was the death of the first life and the birth of the second. When I look back now at the man I was before that floor, I know it was me, but it also looks like someone else entirely, a man who paid a debt so the man I am now could exist. And here is the temptation that floor held up to me. Throw yourself down, make a spectacle of the wound. Demand to be rescued where everyone can see it. Perform the collapse. Let the pain become the whole show. Let what was done to you harden into a case you carry for the rest of your life, your proof that you were the one who got wronged. That is resentment, and God knows I had every reason in the world to take it. I did not. I got up off that floor, and I walked into the second life carrying almost nothing, and I refused to let what had happened to me shrink me into something smaller than what I was becoming, because I had learned by then the one thing that floor exists to teach. Strip away the money, the house, the title, the marriage, the furniture, the very bed you will not lie on, and what is left is the only thing that was ever truly yours. Who you have become, only what cannot be destroyed is true. Everything else is on loan. That is what I have come to know as the serpent awakening. You shed the old skin. You do not get to fold it up and keep it. You leave it lying there on the floor, and you walk out raw and new. It was right around then that a name I had been wearing half as a joke stopped being a joke. I had nicknamed myself the Red Neo, after Neo from the Matrix, the one man who can move through both worlds, the real one and the world of illusion the machines built to farm us. I had dropped it into a company newsletter, half teasing, and it stuck. People started calling me by it, and somewhere inside those 10 days it stopped being a clever brand and became a scar. The Red Neo is not a brand or even a pen name. It is the name I earned the night the first life died, and I chose to walk into the second one anyway, with nothing in my hands. Which brings me to the last floor, the deepest water of them all, the one I very nearly did not come back up from. On the 28th of August 2024, I sat down in the back room of a kava bar in Hollywood, Florida, a town people have taken to calling the City of Lost Souls, and I started to write a book. I did not set out to write a book about shadow work. I set out to write the best and most honest book I could write. I would document everything I had learned in almost 30 years of pulling people out of their own wreckage, and I figured it would be one more good self-help book in a world that already had plenty. But the deeper I went, the more it kept pulling me down toward the one thing underneath all the others, the work I had been doing with people and with myself for most of my life without a tidy name for it. The recovery of the parts of yourself that got exiled, the parts you cut off and buried to survive a life that was never really yours, the ones you were taught to be ashamed of, the parts of you still holding the lost blueprint of who you actually are. That is the shadow. Not a demon to be slain, an exile to be brought home, and the book became what it was always going to be. I did not know it would take 444 days. I did not know it would take me apart piece by piece. The book was called Awaken Your Shadow, and the writing of it was the longest descent of my life. The world went thin at its edges. Time stopped behaving like a measured quantity. Some nights I came awake with the absolute certainty that something was standing beside the bed. Other nights I felt a presence above me, vast and impersonal, like a lighthouse sweeping its beam across the ruins of a drowned world, and I understood that the drowned world was the one I had been living in all along, and that lighthouse, that witness, was the only thing in it that had never once gone dark. I wrote in parking lots and in empty cafes and in rented rooms that felt less like shelter than like exile. And somewhere in the middle of it, I met and lost the love of my life. When I was a boy, I used to draw the same face over and over, a girl I had never met, and I held on to that face like a promise I had made to myself before I had the words for it. And then it was taken from me while I was still a boy dreaming of my forever girl. I lost that dream the way a child loses the thing he loves most before he understands that things can be lost at all, and for decades afterward I went looking for her in all the wrong places, in the wrong women. Women who looked nothing like the pictures I had drawn, women whose storms I mistook for depth, and whose wounds I mistook for a calling, all while telling myself each time that this was the one I was finally meant to save. I was not chasing the dream. I was running from how badly it had hurt to lose it. And then, while I was writing Awaken Your Shadow, after I had nearly given up believing it was real, she walked in wearing the face I had been drawing since before I knew what longing was. She was everything I had been looking for since I was old enough to look, and I loved her with all of it, mind and body and soul. We were not just in love, we were building something, a life and the work both, the very thing you are watching me become right now, and we were going to make it together. I thought the long ache had finally closed. I thought the boy with the pencil had finally gotten his promise back. And then it was destroyed, not by distance, not by time, not by the slow ordinary cooling that ends most things. It was torn apart from the inside by the kind of pain I still do not have language for. Fear wearing the mask of love, suspicion dressed up as truth, a mistrust so deep and so old that it built a case against me out of things that never happened and could not be reasoned with no matter what I did. I made myself into a wall she could break against and not be hurt. I absorbed what I should not have absorbed, forgave what kept coming back, stayed long past the point any sane man would have stayed, and tried with everything in me to be the safe place she had never had. And none of it was enough. I have searched my own conduct for the thing I could have done differently, and to this day I cannot honestly find it, and I have had to make my peace with not knowing how much of what came for us she could even control, and how much of it was something older and darker than either of us, something that wanted the two of us broken and would not be satisfied until it had brought us to ruin. Because in the end it did not just end a relationship, it killed the oldest thing I had ever wanted, the thing I had carried in my heart since I was that boy with the pencil. It was the worst grief I have ever known. It broke something in me I now believe will never fully come back, and maybe it was never meant to. I have learned more lessons in this life than most men get handed in 3, and I will be honest with you, I am done learning them this way. But I will say that she was in my heart every single night I sat writing the hardest chapter of the book that would become my life's calling. I still do not understand why. Maybe because I was called to write to a certain kind of man, a man whose mask has fused itself to his face, a man who made a beautiful vow when he was young. I will be the wall when the wind rises. I will hold the line. I will be the one she can count on. And then he watched that vow harden so slowly that he never felt it happen, into a role he could no longer take off. A man who needs the whole room to orbit him, a man who traded being loved for being respected, and then could not understand why he was so unspeakably alone in the middle of a life that was full of people. A man who ends up backstage after the audience has gone home, sitting in a chair without arms in a room without spotlights, asking the only question he has left. How much of myself did I trade to become the lighthouse in someone else's storm? I knew that man. I had loved a song about that man since I was 13 years old. The same age I waded into Lake Silver, a song about a man standing alone on an empty stage after every last person has filed out, begging for the lights to come up one more time, paying for years he can no longer afford. And maybe you know him too. Maybe you have caught him in the mirror lately. Maybe you have felt him living behind your own face, running the meeting, holding the marriage together, carrying the whole weight, and wondering in the quiet why a life this full feels this empty. If you do know him, then you already know why I had to write Awaken Your Shadow, and you already know it was written for you. Because sitting in that lonely rented room, grieving the love I had just lost, finishing the hardest pages of this book at the very bottom of my own labyrinth, I understood that I was staring directly at the man I could still become. If I let the grief curdle into something hard, if I let the mask win, if I picked the role back up and wore it for the rest of my life because being the untouchable one hurt less than being seen, that is the third temptation. The last one, the highest and most dangerous of the 3, where the enemy says, all the kingdoms of the world if you will only bow down. It tempts you to take the power, to become the one who can never be questioned, to win inside the machine by quietly becoming a machine yourself. It does not come at you with appetite like the first one, or with spectacle like the second. It comes dressed as your own excellence. It hands you a throne and asks only for your soul as the price of sitting down on it. It knows this temptation is nearly irresistible, not because you are weak, but because being needed is the only way most good men can ever experience their own strength. You feel strong because by now you have learned how to hold it all together. You have learned how to be the steady one, the one who does not flinch, the one everybody leans on when their own world is coming apart. And I had learned the same thing the hard way over many years. How to steady myself. How to breathe through the storm, how to regulate the fear, how to keep my own nervous system from running away with me, and on that floor I found the trap hidden inside even that. Because a man can get so good at managing his own pain that he mistakes the managing for healing. He can sit in a calm he has manufactured and call it peace and fall asleep right there, one floor short of the real thing. And maybe you are asleep there right now, mistaking the fact that you have stopped bleeding for the fact that you have healed. The world is full of men stranded exactly there, mistaking regulation for freedom, composure for resurrection, and the calm itself becomes the most comfortable cage of all. I could feel it offering itself to me. I could have stopped there. I did not. And I sat there at that keyboard night after night after night with no dawn anywhere in sight, and I wrote instead of bowing to that temptation. I let the false self die so that the true one would not have to. That is the cost of the final death and rebirth, the one I call the Phoenix Awakening, and it is far beyond what people mean when they say ego death. There is no resurrection that does not first require something real to actually burn, and what had to burn in that room was the man I would have become if I had reached out and taken the throne, and the dream I had carried since I was a boy with a pencil, and the future I was never going to live. It was grief all the way down, not the loss of a mask this time, the loss of something I had truly loved. And the only way through it was to let it go without letting it turn me to stone. I finished the prologue to that book at the stroke of midnight on the 444th day, alone in an Airbnb in St. Petersburg, Florida. The silence so complete it had a sound, the whole arc of all of it pressing in around me at once. When this awakening was finally finished, I was not an improved man. I was not a wiser man. I was not a healed man. I was an ungovernable one, because I had finally learned all the way down in my bones the thing that Lake Silver had been trying to teach a 13-year-old boy in the warm shallows of Winter Haven. There is no bottom. There is no net. There is no safety anywhere. There is only the dark water, the drowned world, and the choice to swim above it, and the witness who rises up to carry you the very instant you stop clawing for a floor that was never, ever coming. So let me come back to you now, on your floor, tonight, and let me tell you the last thing I learned because it is the one that finally set me free. For most of my life I believed I was addicted to chaos. The crisis, the rescue, the wreckage, I kept ending up in it, and I thought something in me must crave it. It was only at the very bottom of all of this that I saw the truth. I was not running toward chaos. I was running from peace. I sat one day with stillness in my own body, real peace, and I could not hold it. My whole system shook it off like a fever, because somewhere long ago I had learned that peace was the dangerous thing, the place where the next blow comes at the moment you let your guard down. The monster I had feared my whole life was never under the bed. The monster was the part of me that had stood guard against peace for so long that it had started calling itself home. And the work, the real work, the only work, was learning to sit in it when peace finally came. Here is what I know that you may not know yet. The reason you are down there is not that you failed. It is that you have finally gone deep enough that your surrender is no longer optional. You have reached the dark water. And everything in you right now is reaching for the bottom, reaching for the old safety, the job, the relationship, the mask, the grip, anything solid to plant a foot on. Your arms are full of the worries and cares of this life, and you cannot fight for your own life until you set them down. And I am telling you exactly what the lake told me. No one is coming to save you. There is no bottom beneath your kicking feet. Stop reaching for it. Stop reaching for it and swim, and you are going to find out that there is a power living inside you that has been waiting this entire time, waiting for you to need it badly enough to finally trust it. I did not get free by climbing out of the dark water. I got free by going all the way down into it 4 separate times and learning on each descent that the one waiting at the bottom is real, and that who you become down there in the cold is the only thing you actually carry back up with you. The rifle, Bayshore. The 10 days, the keyboard at midnight. 4 floors, 4 times I stopped reaching for the bottom and chose to swim, and every single time, without fail, something caught me. The same presence, the witness, the self I had spent my whole life avoiding, the one who knew the very worst of me and loved me anyway. And I will tell you now the thing it took me my whole life to understand, the thing I could not have told that boy in the lake. The witness was never just some better version of me. The presence that rose up in the black water, the one who met me on the cross, the still small voice on Bayshore, the voice on the hotel floor that said, "Get up," it was all the same one, and it was him. Scripture says it plainly. The Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you. The same power that holds the entire cosmos together, that rolled the stone away and called a dead man back into his own body, is alive inside you right now, in the dark, at the bottom, waiting. That is the witness. That is the one who has been carrying you every time you stopped fighting long enough to be carried. And every day, in 10,000 small ways, you get to choose. The noise or his signal, the crowd scratching at a sickness that was never real, or the still small voice underneath it that has never once lied to you. But I have to tell you how he came to be inside you, because this is the part the dead religion left out and the New Age never knew, and it is the hinge the whole thing turns on. You were born whole. I told you that, and it is true. No child comes into this world a mistake. But there is a crack deeper than any wound the world ever put in you, one that no amount of shadow work or healing or becoming will ever reach, because it does not run through your story, it runs through your nature, the same separation from God that every human being has carried from the beginning. It is not something you do. It is something you are, the way I am, the way every man and woman who has ever lived is. You are not a sinner because you sin. You sin because you came into this world already cut off from the source you were made for, reaching your whole life for a flawlessness you can feel you were built for, and missing it every single time. And no man has ever once mended that crack from the inside, because a thing cannot heal the very fault it stands on. And here is the good news, the true gospel, the thing I would have given anything to understand before I tried to carry another soul's fracture on my own back and broke us both. He became the container. That is what the cross was. The God who made you step down into the fracture himself and took the whole weight of every crooked and cowardly and broken thing you have ever done, every place you fell short of the flawless person you have ached to be, and he held all of it in his own body until it was finished. He died for our sins. Not the sins we commit in action, but those we embody as a part of our nature, not as a symbol, not as a story. He became the one container in all the universe strong enough to hold the fracture that no human being, not you, not the ones you love, not the strongest man you have ever known, was ever built to hold. So the spark you feel in you, that deep divine something, the light the New Age swore was proof that you are God, never meant you were God. It meant you are loved by him. One of those is a throne, and you have spent your whole life exhausting yourself trying to sit on it. The other is a homecoming, and the way home was never a technique or a frequency or a mind made perfect by your own hand. It is a surrender. It is the same thing the lake tried to teach a drowning boy. The moment you stop clawing for a floor that was never coming and let yourself fall back into the arms of the one who has been underneath you the entire time and say it out loud with everything you have left. Jesus, be the Lord of this. I cannot hold the fracture. I am done trying to be my own God. Come and be mine. That is the first real beginning you will ever have. Everything before it was only the prologue. You are swimming in the same drowned world I am. Almost everyone in it is asleep, walking the streets underwater and calling it air. But there is a light that moves over those ruins and never goes out, and it is not above you somewhere out of reach. It is the deepest thing inside you, and it is sweeping the dark for you right now. The only thing it is waiting on is the moment you stop reaching for the bottom. I am not calling to you from a mountaintop as I write these lines. I am not above you cheering you on to climb harder. I am out here in the same wilderness you are walking into, just a little further down the path, bleeding from the same thorns that are tearing at you, and all I have to hand you is what the ones ahead of me handed to me, not a map. There is no map out here past the wall, just a hand and a little light and the proof standing right in front of you that the dark water does not get the last word. And here is what I know you are really after in listening to this, even if you would not have said it in these words. It was never the money or the title or the win. Underneath every one of those things you have been chasing, you were chasing one thing: peace. The peace that does not depend on the bank balance or the relationship or the applause. The peace that is the foundation everything good in your life gets built on. The peace that no amount of success has ever once been able to manufacture or replace. The Lord Jesus said it better than I ever could. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. The world hands you peace with conditions, peace that lasts exactly as long as nothing goes wrong. Real peace is not found in getting your way, or controlling the outcome, or finally forcing the world to bend to you. It is found in the paradox that my descent had been driving me toward, and that you might likely be on right now. You are never more free than the moment you stop clawing for control and surrender your will to His. The grip was never freedom. The letting go was. Seek that first, and everything else you have been clawing for gets added on top of it. It is not what you do that matters in life. It is who you become. That is the one thing that no descent can ever take from you, even if it takes away everything else. And who you become is being decided right now, tonight, on the sacred place where you're standing, sitting, or lying down right now. So do not crawl back to the warm and the shallow. Do not reach for a bottom that is not there. Do not bow. Set down the groceries. Stop running from the stillness. Stop catching the sickness the whole world is scratching at, and listen for the signal underneath the noise, the one who has been calling you toward the deep your entire life, not to drown you, but to finally teach you to swim. And now we return to that boy in the water. This time he is you, and the presence that caught me that day is calling out to you. Dare the dark water and surrender to the quiet voice inside you. Dare to be the one body in the room the lie never touches, the single soul who will not scratch at a sickness that was never real. Dare to walk past the wall, out into the wilderness, out of step with the whole sleeping world, and to call that the truest thing about you. Dare to stop asking what you will do with the rest of your life, and to let the only question that ever mattered rise up in its place: who you will become. Dare to stay still when the peace finally comes, and to stop running from the uncertainty that you spent your whole life mistaking for the enemy. Come forward now. Come forward out of the shallows you have been calling a life. Come forward out of the role you can no longer feel the edges of. Come forward out of the calm you manufactured and mistook for peace. Come forward out of the fortress that will never become a kingdom. Come forward as the ungovernable soul.